Hey everyone, welcome to our first episode of Dungeon Mastery. You've got DM Jez, how you going? And back on the screen, DM Robin, hey.
Hi guys.
Sacrificing the current title of DM of Doom to show us the man behind the Doom. How you been, mate? Been well?
Doing well. Very excited to talk all things DMing. I feel like you're always sitting alone on the side of the table, so it'll be nice to share some of the secrets and what goes on behind the DM screen.
Absolutely, so true. It's just exactly why we wanted to do this, because let's just peel back a little bit of the onion first, just to share what we have in store for this Dungeon Mastery experience, when it's going to run, and why we created it. Robin, very quick question. How long have you been DMing for?
I think I started DMing in one of my first years of university. So being out there for a while now, I think it must have been around 8 years ago or something around there where I picked up my first set of dice.
Nice. And for me, more seriously, maybe in the last 12 months. And the reason that I think I'm really excited about doing this show is I get to pick the brains of someone who's been doing it for 8 years and ultimately be really selfish and learn from all that. And if that helps others in the process, then even better. So that's the kind of the crux behind, or the purpose and idea behind the show, I guess. Just very quickly, who are we? My name is Jeremy. With me is obviously Robin. We are part of the Raging Rolls. Raging Rolls are currently also streaming Icewind Dale, Rama the Frost Maiden, where we are up to episode 8. Next Thursday, so stick around and watch that. You can of course catch up on YouTube, and we have a recent podcast you can catch up on all the different content across all different channels. And I'll put some links in the chat shortly. So to kick things off, we just want to get to know each other a bit and share a bit more about who we are as players and as DMs. So Rob, I'm going to throw a question to you and just as a DM, like, you know, you've told us you've been rolling dice for 8 years or so, but what else? Like, tell me what's happened in that last 8 years for you. How did you get into it, and what have you, I guess, gotten out of it in the last 8 years?
Sure. I think D&D has always been a way for me to connect with like-minded people, I think. And it's definitely proven in that 8 years to do exactly that. Initially, when I was first looking into it, I was in a new city and was sort of understanding the types of hobbies that I enjoyed, and finally had the freedom to do all of them. And in the back of my head, I'd always heard of D&D, and it had always been framed to me as probably the nerdiest thing that any human being would be able to do with their lives. And although at the time I sort of held it sort of away, I did glance over at that camp every once in a while. And when I was looking to build a bit of community in the new city, it became an easy thing for me to jump into. We had an adventurers league at the time, and suddenly I had my first wizard rolled up at level 1, and I remember opening a dungeon door for the first time, and a witch for the evening had prepared a lightning bolt that pierced through the entire party, instantly killing my level 1 character. And although it was a waste of 3 hours, I felt exhilarating. Like it was such a burst of energy. And I was like, if this is what it feels like to lose, imagine what this game feels like to win. And since then, I've dabbled in all of the different games. I've tried to touch most of what 5e had to offer, and really found my sweet spot, not necessarily behind a character, but really facilitating a lot of those wow moments with players, trying to share with them some of the cool memories I have of reading books when I was young, and the amazing plot twists and cool magic that people uncover, you know, just as they walk down a dusty road. And that's sort of where I find myself today, still looking at how I can tell those stories and trying to improve on them as I go. And what about yourself then?
Oh, it's my story doesn't go back as well as far as you. I was going to say, well, it doesn't go back as far as you, but it kind of does. I remember, I think I must have been 12 years old right? And for my birthday at that age, my parents got me the advanced D&D boxed set. And I thought, wow, it had a big red dragon on the front, and I was like, this is amazing. It had about 400 different pieces of instruction manual and a nice big fold-out dungeon map. Looked amazing. Do you think I could find anyone who was willing to help me with the instructions to understand that thing? Not a chance in hell. My family at the time, my family did not have the patience for trying to understand that and coach me through like that whole role-playing experience. So that game, as much as I kept getting it out, sort of 12 and say 13, it didn't get any traction, and it's gone. I don't know where it is now, but I'm sure it's really worth a lot more money than what was paid for it now. And it wasn't then until, what year are we in? 3.5 years ago, at the end of 2019, when I remember sitting on a train heading to work. And for whatever reason, I just thought, I must have been reflecting back on that particular moment. And I just thought, I wonder if this is still a thing. I wonder if people do this. So I just searched on Facebook, Dungeons and Dragons group or something. And I couldn't believe it that within about 3 or 4 minutes, I'd found a group in my area. Chimed in, hey, I'm in this area, can I join in? And about 3 minutes after that, a text message from a colleague of mine at work texted me about it. So small world that he was in the same thing, and that's Dave, who plays Tolman Whitescale in our Frostmain campaign. And so as part of that, we had a cup of coffee, we had a chat, and he told me about this little known show called Critical Role. So that was my first foray into what this whole experience could be on massive scale, high production type thing. Which was amazing, right? That was kind of the hook moment for me, because you've really got a feel for, these people are just winging a story. They're just making it up going as they go along, which really gravitated toward, really resonated with me, because if I think about what I do for my career, a lot of it, you've got to just make up stuff on the fly and keep people engaged and kind of tell a bit of a story in a very corporate sense, but you're still telling a story.
It's an adventure, but just not as exciting as slaying dragons.
No, we need. Anyway, I digress. But I think from that, when we'd had a chance to kind of get that group organized, we managed to find Robin here being the first DM and ran the first game of Dungeons and Dragons I'd ever experienced properly. Now, I still remember Robin, we'd all arranged to meet at the local RSL club in a basement area, and rolled some dice and just getting some looks from people and some interesting, like, people coming over and asking, what are you doing? And to your point before, like you said, it's always been this kind of super nerdy thing. It was. I think it still absolutely has that kind of stigma attached to it, but there's a way more interest about it right now, and that's certainly accelerated or grown over the last couple of years. Absolutely.
I think Baldur's Gate 3 recently is a good example that comes to my mind, where you've got this very obviously D&D 5e inspired experience being released with high level of graphics to the masses, and people are really loving this game. If only they knew there was like infinite content available in a very similar way in D&D.
Yeah, the DLCs and seasons are limitless, right?
As long as you have a willing DM, which is sort of where we are starting from today. Hey?
Absolutely. So yeah, that was my entry into being a player in the game, and at the time, I could never have kind of fathomed, taking that next step and becoming the DM.
So, I mean, tell me then about that first experience. We're rolling dice in the middle of an RSL. You've got there. I remember you had the iPad ready.
I did.
You sort of prepared for the session. What was, I guess, the first thing that surprised you about being a player, first of all? And then I guess a follow-on from that, what about the DMing seemed interesting to you as you experienced it for the first time as a player?
Yeah. So, first part of that question, what about it got me? Yeah, was that right? What about it got me
Yeah, what was like some? I guess like it's your first time experiencing it, like
Yeah.
rolling the dice yourself. What stood out to you?
Oh, what stood out to me? So in that session, in that first game you ran for us, you know, you're right. I was there. I had my whole character sheet made up on D&D Beyond. Thought I've got this. I've got all the tech. I've got all the stuff that I need. And what stood out to me was that all that periphery just doesn't matter. And what stood out to me was just getting immersed in the story and becoming like personifying that character was unreal. Like, it was fun, and I didn't have to worry about all the tech and crap like that. It's just rolling the dice and being the character and being in the moment, right? I think that's something which it's very easy to fall in a trap of worrying about the outside world and what's way in the future and what's happened in the past. But stepping into that game at the RSL, it was just all that went away, and it was just about being in the moment and actually being in someone else's moment. Even weirder.
You really got to embody that and empathize with that little character. I remember they had the little minis that we put down on the little center bench.
Yeah, and further to that, just the fun of the whole thing, right? Like I talk about it being like deep and character immersion, and then being that character, being that personifying that character, but just the antics, the stupid sort of playground toilet humor. It was just like any kind of regard to current reality just went out the window, and it was just the fun of it all.
I think I blame a lot of it from two things. I grew up with Warcraft 3, and although it was like high fantasy, they never really took themselves seriously as a setting either. You know, even the peons would make jokes about themselves being sort of forced to work, and you know, it was just one of those funny settings where although you loved the epic high fantasy lightning bolts, it never lost its fun, its humor. And I think that's something that I definitely try and create in every one of my sessions. Like, yes, we deal with serious stuff, but I want us to first and foremost have a fun time rolling dice. If we get to be a bit silly and play a bit of fast and loose with the universe, I think we're allowed to do that.
I think like that is something which is really like occurred to me naturally, just even relatively recently. Right, I'm currently running Rama the Frost Maiden. It says on the outset, I'm probably jumping episodes ahead in our show tonight, but it's supposed to be set in this very dark and depressed environment where everyone's upset because it's been cold for years. And I did go out of the gate saying this is going to be pretty like heavy, darker campaign. And then you're right, it's kind of occurred to me like I need to win. Like, where's the hilarity? I need to add some craziness in here, otherwise it's just going to be depressing. So I think humor plays a huge role in keeping parties together and keeping people engaged.
It does, and I think there's a time and place for both, right? You respect the scene when it is serious, and you respect the scene when you're having fun. And as a DM, I think you kind of are the person that accepts what exists in canon, right? There can be a lot of things that happen in the conversation, but only you can lock in the player's choice. And I think sometimes, you know, you can have a lot of shenanigans before it actually starts to have an impact on your world.
Yeah, you can absolutely have some lighthearted shenanigans, which are a harmless bit of fun. Speaking of such, I remember in that first game you ran for us, something else which stood out to me, and is I think answering the second part of your question, was how no matter what chaos was happening on the map or in the story, it really felt like you had every scenario covered. You were able to just like, okay, that's cool, that's happening. Now's what's happening next, right? And for me, that was a bit like, holy cow, how much did this guy prepare for this little 2-hour session at the RSL? Like, it seemed like you just had every one of these bases covered. And for my first game as a player, I was like, that's some next level shit.
That's pretty cool. I'm glad I was able to give that to you.
So for yourself, then how did you reach that kind of point where you could give that impression to people? What was your progression from player
I
to
guess
DM?
you think a lot about these things, and I've always felt like a bit of a natural when it came to DMing. As much as like you must know for work as well, like sometimes there are certain types of people that gravitate to the role, that there's a natural people centric approach to life that leads you into sort of our career, but also into being a DM. I've always felt like I could think well on my feet, and I was lucky enough to be brought up in a household where I was given every fantasy book that I could get my hands on from a very young age, and I've always been fascinated with magic systems. I thought the books that I really fell in love with were the ones where a character was able to take almost a science of a magic system and use it to make new things happen and to change the world in ways that other people had never been able to imagine. And I feel like priming myself and all of that, and then jumping into D&D where somebody was like, hey, I'm doing something, I'm messing with an elf, for example. And in my head I was like, I've got this catalog of so many different interpretations of elves, and none of them would take kindly to you messing with their forest. It's like the stereotypes in my head almost turn into this like book, which I can use at any point to filter an action into a consequence. It's like, you've messed with who? The elves. Great, that's bad. Here's a negative consequence. And as such, I find myself now, if I was to be told you're sitting down and creating an adventure for someone, putting a group of people in a setting, wherever they go, the people will react. As long as I am able to accurately model their behavior based on whatever the action is, the world is like reacting. The world is behaving according to the player's actions. And I don't need to necessarily foresee everything as long as I can process everything as it occurs. And so that's really the way I approach DMing, much more than planning for every eventuality.
Okay, I'm just gonna go off on a tangent here and just drill into that if I can. Like, how do you approach trying to quickly cater for every one of those possible scenarios? Know what I mean? Like, so you've said that, okay, if someone messes with the elves, right, that potentially you weren't expecting someone to try and confront them like that, right?
You could have ruined the only safety net that I had planned up until that point. They were supposed to find refuge in the elves, and now they've burnt a bridge.
You're right. So any kind of planning and preparation that you've done and said, the characters should, well, there's a scene you've created where they are going to interact with these elves, and they should find safety and whatever. All right, and then someone's thrown a hand grenade into that, and that whole scene trajectory has to be chucked out the window. Does that give you pause to go, oh shit, I'm stuck? Or how readily able are you to just go, cool, now we're going this way?
I guess in the way my mind works is it's like, I don't have to decide everything in that moment. What I have to do is I have to process the immediate reaction. It's like, the elves are pissed. They're going to want to chase you out, if not capture you. That's like initially what my head goes to. So that's our first encounter immediately. Okay, escape from the elven encampment. So now they're coming for you. It's either going to be narratively satisfying to have them in jail, which I think would be a fun place to end up, or they completely escape and they're able to find a hiding place that's good enough to keep them occupied for long enough to sort of go under their radar. That leads to a stealth-based couple of sessions as they try and maneuver out of elven territory. On the other hand, if they end up actually getting captured, now suddenly there's an element of negotiation and sort of diplomacy that needs to come into effect. Or, we've got an opportunity for a prison break, which seems like a good day in D&D, regardless of where we go. So, like, in my head, I'm like, I know that it's all fun. Where are you guys going to take it? like show me where you as a party feel like going. Do you and through your actions, you tell me where I've got to put my focus.
So even just then, the way you kind of describe that, oh, I know that I'm gonna either chase someone or take them to prison, or there's gonna be a prison break. The fact that you're able to just like a bang, 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 I've got three more options just to go straight away. Like when you encounter someone who's giving you an input, a consequence, say, how far ahead are you thinking at that point? Because the reason I asked the question is that when I'm faced with these kind of things at the moment, I'm thinking, this, then this, then this, then this. All right? Which sometimes, even when there's dialogue going on or people are just having a side conversation, I'm trying to think 3 or 4 steps ahead, right? Which I question myself whether is that the best way to approach things, rather than just being fully immersed in what is happening there and then, and just thinking about what is the next action.
I guess this is where I see an area of improvement for myself as well in the way I DM. It's trying to be a bit more intentional of the ending, right? We're storytellers, but what we're actually doing is we're creating, a satisfying bridge from the first moment in a tavern to the satisfying conclusion, which is them defeating the big bad and saving the world. The more we know the ending and what's required in the ending, almost like a recipe, we know we have to, check off A, B, and C. The approach to tick those off is less important, as long as we still are able to hit those 3 eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's like, you trust yourself, you trust that you're guiding them towards the goal. But I think I definitely tend to lead much more into be in the moment with the players, and almost like the rule of cool becomes my only guiding light in those moments. Where it's like, if I was writing an epic fantasy, what would I want to be reading next? Like, what's the next thing that I think would be just cool to experience narratively? And from there, I sort of just fulfill each of those little fantasies as I go along the path to the objective.
do you find that a bit of a delicate balance? I feel as I'm asking you 1,000 questions here, but I'm learning a lot.
Please do.
Do you find that a bit of a delicate balance trying to play, say, the rule of cool, in which case potentially anything could go, versus while trying to also stay true to the world and the environment you've created?
Yeah, and I guess that's the only thing that's really important to keep in mind. The stricter you are about your setting, your world, and the more you follow that rigorously, I think you have less ability to be flexible in your DMing. I know several DMs who definitely are far more aligned to, like, this is a robust world with robust rules, and you doing something has long-standing ramifications. It feels like a level of world building that requires you to have quite a big investment into the rules and the lore of the world that you find yourself in. But when I play D&D, I sort of think that that's where the difference is between reading a book and playing the game. I can, if we can keep the rules light and give I guess accommodations for not knowing everything. As a DM, you can be like, hey, this is context, the world is different in this way in this moment, so don't forget that when you're making your decision. That's fairly natural, and I don't think takes away from the coolness of the setting just because they don't know it like a real human with 25 years of lived experience in that world might. So I tend to have my worlds be conceptually high fantasy, but the policies and the rules fairly light, so that we can accommodate stories easier. And when you're breaking a law, I found, like, when we were playing through Waterdeep, for example, there was so many strict rules in place that if the players stuffed up, all of these consequences would happen. And suddenly it was like a competing objective for me as a DM. It's like, I want to be authentic with the setting, but you guys are being fun and you guys are having a good time. I don't want to punish you just because you guys are being a bit cheeky, right? Like, I think that cheekiness has to also have a space in D&D. And, as the main characters, it's okay sometimes, in my opinion, and this is where we differ as DMs, in the community, to get away with a bit more than you probably would if it was like a hyper realistic environment, if that makes sense.
Have you? Oh, we should set some context in that. Since 2020, which I think where we started properly sitting around a table, you ran Waterdeep Dragon Heist for us over a period of about 18 months or so, I think.
I think so.
You ran a bit of Acquisitions Inc. for us at the same time.
It was a fun little setting, that one.
You've also run your Homebrew world in the world of Chankasha, which is an amazing world you created. And even inside that campaign, we ran Wild Beyond the Witchlight.
That was pretty fun too.
So a whole campaign within a homebrew, it was hectic. Let alone the one-shots and things you've created along the way. So I just wanted to share that with anyone who's watching or listening to this, in that Dan, Robin and I go back a few years now and have played a whole host of games together. Having said that, I'm learning heaps from having just this 20-minute conversation we've had so far.
It's great to get like a lot of this stuff out in the open, because it's a bit of distance between those initial sort of campaigns now as well.
Yeah,
and I think your own skills as a DM have grown dramatically given your recent sort of taking over the mantle of DMing for the stream, sort of as a main cast member.
It's huge. Like, to your point before, around when you ran Waterdeep and you got consequences and lore and the world, I'm finding that at the moment, because there is so many threads that can be pulled and so many different consequences that could have ripple effects or follow-on effects, which could be in 18 months' time. Right? Yep. It's like, that's a whole. We could have a whole like couple of sessions on how the hell do you keep track of stuff. But we'll park that one for a little bit later.
I'm very excited to get to that one eventually, because I've been doing a lot of pondering on that myself recently, and I've got a couple of ideas now.
Oh, we'll definitely catch up on that one.
We'll pin that one there.
So over those last 4 years and your time before that, you're creating this, as DMs, we're creating a world where players can enjoy the story.
Yep.
So why do you do it? What's been the motivator and reward for you?
I remember some of my fondest memories when I was a kid being that of, almost you're given a mundane object. I remember my cousins and I had these multicolored plastic balls from like a pool of a ball pit. Like, there was green ones, blue ones, red ones, whatever. But in that moment, they were Pokeballs of every different variety. There was a fire Pokemon and a grass Pokemon and a ground Pokemon, and we'd be running around the yard and we'd be having these epic battles, these massive multi Pokemon out at once, and defeated Team Rocket, defeated all these sort of enemies we imagined for ourselves, and like ever since I was a kid and sort of grew up, that magic, that feeling of infinite potential, sort of, there wasn't anything that made me feel that way until D&D. Mm-hmm. And D&D was perfect at that. It was everything that I had as a kid, but it had so much more to it because it was so much richer, and we were able to do it collaboratively with, we've got a few adult humans that are getting together and kind of imagining this world together, and it makes it so much more real. When I got to try my first game with a friend, it was just the two of us, and I'd been learning all of the stuff about DMing, and he was keen to be a player of mine, but neither of us had really played before. And it was just he and I, and he thought a Dragonborn was super cool, and I was like, of course it is. It's a dragon human hybrid. Like, I am so down for
Can't
that.
go wrong.
And I had to kind of come up with an encounter, and I remember still this one was so silly, but it was just like 3 goblins kind of come out of the brush at him, and that was the encounter. You know, he was walking in a field. It was the most bare bones setting possible, and we got to just smash these goblins, and I could see his character just like getting more powerful. We leveled up as he was like going towards their encampment, and I sort of narrated that there were tracks leading up to a cave, and he walked in the cave and saw the evidence of these goblins having lived here. You could still see their sleeping bags, and he could hear a few more of them yammering by a fire sort of towards the back of the cave. And I sort of just fell in love with being able to paint pictures so natively. It was like a canvas that was built for me as a person almost. It was like my words become lore, and the flowery descriptions that I choose end up becoming reality for these players, and they get to kind of, like you said, you embodied that character, and I give you a world that's worthy of living in. You know, it's like it's you bring like an effort of being this character, and I make sure that there's something to experience. And it's that like us coming together to tell that story, which is so unique about D&D and tabletop RPGs. And I think for me, that's kind of my love for it is in that creative collaboration.
Nice. That's a very well-rounded answer.
What about yourself?
All sorts of things, right? Like I do love the ability to immerse myself in the world building or worldcraft, or whatever we call it, world building, into the history, into the lore, into the characters and NPCs. And then what I really enjoy is finding ways to stitch discrete elements together. All right, when I can lay out a few hooks here and there, or a few clues and crumbs, and see players pick up on it and then bring the whole thing together, it's just like, oh yes, you did it. You followed the path. That's great. Doesn't always go to plan. When it does, it's like, yes, that works. But yeah, something which I really get out of it is seeing the characters develop from being unknowns to each other. Forgotten the right word for it. To being like a close-knit group with all this backstory that's now everyone's invested in, and I get out of it as a DM is sort of laying out a network of paths where those stories come together. If that makes sense.
That makes sense.
As a player, I've really enjoyed that whole character development backstory thing, in the same thing, just in a different dynamic, right? Trying to like find the right moments to surface my own character's backstory, and at the same time find the right moments to dig into other characters' backstories and see how those things potentially tie into a larger story. And whether they did or not, who knew? But the mystery of it all is what I really like, both uncovering it as a player, but also like laying out the mystery as a DM.
And I think I kind of, the way you described that, I sometimes imagine that you and I together would make the perfect DM, you know? It's like if you know, I had the commitment to really scope those out and really think about those elements, and then was able to roll them into the sort of making it up as I go along approach, I think there'd be like the perfect unity. But for now, you know, we each have to have our own brains.
Yeah, we're not there yet. AI is not there yet. Speaking of AI, Robin.
Yes.
That's obviously been a huge explosion in recent times, and I'm deviating from any kind of conversation we've had so far a little bit. But I know you're a bit of a advocate for AI, and especially the whole GPT space. Two-part question. firstly, how much do you think it has impacted the world of D&D to date? And second part, has it affected how you DM?
So to the first question, how does it sort of affected D&D to date? I think it has to be starting to impact the way that we're creating, the way we're writing. But the more I use it, the more I'm also sort of coming to terms with this idea of authentic artistic expression. And it's a concept I never would have thought I would be dabbling with, after getting immersed in AI. But I think there's always the question of, I know you can do things with AI, but it doesn't always mean that you should. And I think, to your point, part of the satisfaction of DMing is putting your heart and soul into a story and watching it, bring your players to tears, not speaking literally, of course, but making sure that they are experiencing all of the love and care and thought of your adventure and of the things that you kind of imagined for them. Now, I don't think that getting AI to write your entire adventure is ever going to be a fun and a rewarding experience for you, even if it can do it all. But where I think AI becomes really beneficial is, we talked a bit about the island that we find ourselves on as DMs, where we know that there are people even in our party that would be able to be good to brainstorm with, but often they're out of bounds for us because they can't be privy to those breadcrumbs you've been laying out over your adventure. And I think where AI comes in really handily is hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking. I want to be able to do this, my players. I'm thinking this is how I approach it with them. Is there any problems with this? Or is there a better way for me to phrase that? Or do you think there's a more exciting way for me to tell this part? Or could you, write me the description of the location which I've outlined for you? Because, I don't really want to sit there playing with flowery language where I know you could paint me a perfect word picture in seconds. I'm still the director of the play, even if AI is one of the writers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see exactly what you mean. And I know when I started running the campaign I'm running right now, I was like, I'm not going to touch it. This is going to be all straight out of the book and whatever I can muster up. And so be it. Do you know what? It's really hard to come up with relevant character names on the fly.
Yep.
But, right now I've asked ChatGPT, or not right now, previously I'd asked ChatGPT, give me 5 male and 5 female names for these races and arrange it in a table for me. And now I've got it there. I just have it there and they all kind of suit everything. I think for that kind of stuff, it's great. The other thing that I've used it for is for coming up, like you said, for coming up with some location descriptions. What do I see, or what's this look like? I've used it a bit for give me some dialogue. If an NPC needs to say something, whether it's relevant or not, but rather than me fumbling through words and sounding like the same person every time, give me something this type of person would say. Yeah. And I found that to be a really good way to create really good dynamics for an NPC.
Nice.
Because I've seen some of the players just go, holy shit, was that really significant? Do we need to write that down? I was like, I don't know, maybe. Because when that kind of shit happens, you're like, oh, maybe you should write it down. Maybe you will have an impact in 24 months' time.
And I think that sort of nails it for me. It's like low effort content is suddenly high quality. That's what AI has delivered more than replacing the high effort content. I think it makes the depth of your world so much richer because, you've got a full-time writer effectively filling in the mundane for you. It's like you don't have to put that effort in anymore, yet you get all of the value of that effort. And I think that's hard to quantify, but I think it's going to become really normal for us to kind of rely on something else to fill the gaps in for us sometimes.
Yeah, I love that. Fill the gaps because I can't brain that much brain.
And like I mentioned a bit about the data and keeping track of everything, and from my adventures DMing for you, I've obviously gone through a few approaches in that time. Something that I've been dabbling with more recently is trying to do a lot of automation of your documentation, and you're trying to keep track of all your notes. And I found a tool that allows you to integrate into ChatGPT effectively. And every time you want to create a new session plan, for example, you go new session plan. It has all of your framework already established. And you talked about your needing, the race names, male and female of your NPCs, but you spin it up and have the AI automatically come in and fill out your table fresh every new one you sort of spit out. These kind of things are like in their infancy, right? But we can already see the value of that from a DM being able to just be like new, boom, pre-populated, fill in the sort of theme of today's session, and then the rest of it sort of gets generated for you. That's something that I could build today, and that's absurd.
Did you say that's a resource that exists today?
Well, I've been using Notion. Notion has been my baby. It's $13 a month or something for me, but you can then effectively on any database record put a prompt in any of the fields, and it will update that field based on the information in the rest of the record.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I've been a long-time Evernote user, but that sounds next level.
I'm getting it to do automatic summaries and descriptions of all of my records, and it updates them on submission. So once I finish editing a doc, it automatically updates the description to be up to date with what's now in the document. It's like it's magic, but it's like right in front of us.
That's amazing. So there's the first DM resource for anyone who's keeping notes. Notion combined with GPT for taking some of the mundane stuff and making it automated for you.
There's a whole bunch of work you could put in to make it perfect, but it's a cool rabbit hole to jump into.
That's amazing. What else? What else has been a more, I guess, a more go-to, more traditional resource for yourself that's helped you grow and be a better DM?
So I think initially the hardest part for me was acclimatizing to the D&D culture, trying to understand what my players are, coming to my table assuming. We talked a little bit earlier about Critical Role, and obviously a large part of our modern D&D fans have sort of come from that environment and trying to bring that expectation into games. I think as a DM, trying to learn all of those things takes a lot of time and requires you to expose yourself to a lot of media in the space. I've had friction several times when somebody has thought something would work a certain way in my games because it works that way in somebody else's table. Mm-hmm. It's a weird problem to have, but I think finding a D&D podcast that
like the Raging Rolls podcast,
as an example, that fits the style of DMing that you're looking to give to your players, the feeling you want to create for your players, is a great first step. It's like understanding the way they handle their own curveballs, understanding the way they describe things, and if a player is being silly, how do they respond? I think I learned a lot just by it, listening to, in my case, it was Adventure Zone, by the McElroy brothers, and that one in particular was just so beautiful at both the comedy and creating a really fun campaign without really needing you to invest a lot of time building an understanding of the lore, because they were also new. The way they DM'd was very appropriate for new people and helping you understand the game. So that was a really good resource for me. And then Matt Colville's YouTube series on how to be a DM. Still to this day, is one of the single best resources on DMing that I've found. He's produced several print books as well on creating more dynamic monsters, and kind of tries to explain that, you know, the system of D&D is only a piece of it, and us as DMs, the real adventure we have is when we break the rules and we know where we can tweak those sort of by the book ways of running and add more dynamic feeling combat for our players, you know, more choice, more options. That's where we can take what, you know, they've experienced at every other table and make it ours, and he does a really good job of explaining that.
I have to be honest, I'm taking that one away. I've heard the name before, but I haven't committed the time to actually researching it or looking into it, but I'm absolutely going to now.
A few of his books are really great, and he really helped teach me about action-orientated combat, which was something that I still try to employ more of. But the idea that our monsters have to wait their turn is absurd. We get to be the arbiters of their action economy, and you know, if we've got a cool scorpion tail and 2 cool scorpion claws, it sounds like we've got 3 actions that we can throw at players during a round and spread out through the round. You know, making it less of my turn, your turn, and you're dealing with a dangerous wild animal. And I think that's the shift that he encourages, is sort of breaking the paradigms around combat and really making it more fun and a bit faster paced, while not losing the strategic components of it.
Would you say that that's the kind of approach you would go down as a new DM, or get the basics right first as per rules as written, and then stepping stone into that more action-oriented combat?
I personally subscribe to the camp that you'll never know enough of the rules to get started.
A lot of words in those books. You're right.
There's a lot of words, and I'm so guilty of this, but I've never read any of them cover to cover. It's like it's just not necessary to be a good DM. It will help you with some things, but I promise you, as a long-term DM, the players just care so much more about the rules than I ever have. And like, if a player is being a stickler, I'm like, well, I guess that's what the line is, guys.
Yeah, you're right. I bought the books. You can see them there.
My shelf looks much the same.
Yeah, with the intent to read them cover to cover. You think I've got the time to do that? Not a chance in hell. So I've had to shift my mindset to say they're not novels. You can't read these cover to cover. They're textbooks. They're reference items. Yeah,
they are.
You have a question about something, then you can go to it for the answer.
And I think it helps that we all have a shared understanding that this is sort of where the rules live. And if we want to make sure we're on the same page, we have a definitive answer. But I find so much, like, with the internet now, especially if you're new, and obviously buy the books if you're going to read them and enjoy them, but you don't need them to start out, because you've got Google as such a fantastic resource. And you can Google the answer to any mechanic that you like. And once you've sort of figured out the D20 system, the rest of the rules sort of just are like, oh, when am I supposed to make an attack of opportunity? It's like, oh, I can either make it here or there. As a DM, does it really matter? It's like the monster's going to die sooner or later. You can adjust that as you need to. As long as the experience is fun, the ruling you make is secondary. It's there to keep things moving forward, as long as you always make sure that you eventually do understand, the mechanics behind that encounter. So next time you don't have to, make things up. You sort of understand that that's a limit of your knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just knowing the basics is good enough to get started, and then you can improvise, and then just in time.
The rest is yours.
Right.
and I think it's true that, like, when you're new, you want to be as good as your favorite dungeon masters.
Yeah.
But I think you we're talking about our RSL experience, for example. I definitely don't consider that the peak of my DMing, but for you guys, it was more than you've ever experienced.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be kind to ourselves and remember that, we're still doing something that's so unique. Like, no other form of entertainment feels like this. And and we're still the people that make it happen and allow our friends to have fun in that space. Even if it's, 3 kobolds running out of a grass field, it's still fun to players when they're first starting out.
Inflatable Cat in the chat's asked a question, and pretty much exactly along those lines, is that how can you, as a DM, how do you be less worried about what your players think and just be more immersed in the session? Her question is, what are the tips from us for being less terrified that your players think your session is not good enough?
I have a really this is a challenge. This is a genuine challenge, I think, as a DM. We talk again about the silo that we find ourselves in sometimes as DMs. That silo is often also from genuine criticism. It's like a player doesn't ever feel comfortable, I guess for the most part, in really providing that negative feedback, and oftentimes it can feel like, they may have negative feedback, but they're enjoying the game as a whole, so they don't want to get the DM to stop DMing if they complain. And I think it's a real problem with the I guess the power dynamic of DMing. It's like I think to be really good long term needs you to love your story, love your setting, be passionate about the story you're crafting for your own sake. And I think that sort of philosophy holds true to a lot of things in life. But once you're happy with it and you're proud of it, showing something you're proud of to your friends should never, if they're good friends, should never be a problem, right? It's like, I want you to experience my world. Like there's a respect that goes both ways. So find the right people and tell a story that you love, and the rest sort of sorts itself out in the shenanigans.
I couldn't agree more. Like you mentioned, like be passionate about it, and I think that's the secret to it. And Inflatable Cat, I've played it at your table, and I can't sing your praises enough. Like you take the campaign to a new level. I know some of the people at the table have played that game before, but I think it's different enough, and I think that's the beauty of it. But what stands out for me, and what I think the key for me in this whole topic is, if having that depth of passion is infectious. If you can, if I find that if I'm really involved in it, I do way too much prep for my games every Thursday. It keeps me up at night. But then I'm able to sit there and run that session or run that game and be there every step of the way, because I'm immersed in the world. I know I'm in the content, and it's something I'm really excited to share. And that excitement, that passion is infectious, and that rubs off from the players. And not every session is going to be a 5-star show, but if it was, that's the new benchmark, which is hard to beat, right? You need those ebbs and flows for when you get those sessions that wrap up and your players just like, oh my god, that was amazing. You need the lows to reach those highs, right? But the passion is always going to be there, and the players will eat that up.
And I think, we can, through our stream online, see it many times with that, where, there's certain times when the energy is just infectious, and you see everybody just gravitate towards a moment. And that happens whether you sometimes have a slump or not. Those moments come together, and you get to do something epic together, eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Robin, speaking of epic things, what do you reckon is the best game moment you've had in memory, obviously, that you've run? Does that make sense? Did I word that correctly?
I think I'll answer it. You can tell me whether my answer is on point. So for me, I created my first campaign in a really simple premise. It was like a high fantasy campaign with gods at the center point of it. It was called Chosen of the Ancients, was what I named the campaign. And I let the players, not really knowing where it was going to end, choose a sort of deity from any historic culture, from human religions past or any fantasy gods that they might want to employ from the D&D universe. And through that campaign, because we had that end goal inside and this sort of central theme, everything built around this idea of sort of being the chosen of the gods, like the representative of them on the mortal plane. And the story culminated in all of the players themselves getting a following. They were able to convince enough mortals to sort of worship them while they were even still themselves mortal, that they ascended into godhood. And it was sort of funny because them ascending wasn't really the big deal, because it was a means to the end. Mm-hmm. They were trying to kill a god of chaos. And finally they got there, and then they realized that the battle was already over. But by the time they got there, the chaos had already won, and they were realizing that the battle was far too one-sided, and effectively all their effort was for nothing. And it was this moment of like failure as they looked across the field of battle, where these ancient gods were fighting for the future of all realms, and they looked and collectively realized that they like all was lost. It was sort of this defeat of the good guys, and staring one to the other, back to the party, in unison, they willed their collective power to the party themselves, and I granted them a single wish. That was all. I was like, you have one, and I'm warning you, I'm going to try and pick it apart with the ruthlessness of a dungeon master. And my players, and this is what why it was so epic, they took that responsibility so seriously, and together crafted a wish that was just unbendable. It was so perfect. And I remember it was overpowered as anything. It was like, let us go back in time to this X point, but maintaining our current knowledge and abilities. It was sort of they made sure that there was no way they lose the next time, and like with a snap of a finger, they were there, and they'd sort of set themselves up for success. And I got to watch them sort of rectify the mistakes of their past, and finally coming back to fight her, and having her realize in sort of this like paradoxical way, she was so sure she'd won, but because they'd kind of gone back, she hadn't realized that they'd been onto her power. And so when they got there again, she thought she had the high ground, but they'd been able to basically chip away at the only advantages they had, leaving to one final fair fight between them and the goddess of chaos. And it was just, I can never reach that peak again, or I haven't at least up until this point. It was just so sick.
Was that a moment where they came up with that wish like in the same session? It was like, okay, we'll take a break, we'll come back with that next week.
I let them have time, because it was like in that moment time had stopped, and I sort of let them think about it. But I didn't give them any feedback until they submitted their wish. I made sure that any sort of thinking they did was without my judgment. So they really had to hope that they'd cover their bases.
Yeah, right.
But it was pretty fun.
When they got, it felt like what you just described them, is they got to the end game, and then went back to like halfway through the campaign and did the second half again.
It was like, one of the examples was that they there were a few strongholds of chaos that were feeding this goddess power, and like the way that I'd built the world was that worshippers gave power, so the more following you had, the stronger you became as a deity. So only by rooting out all of her followers were they able to bring down her power. But when they went there the first time, they hadn't really found all of the hubs, like all of these sort of strongholds. And it was, as they came back, they identified like a mind flayer hive that was worshipping the goddess of chaos. And so on Dragonback, one of them flew through the hive, And I remember like this was the Dragonborn from the first example I used that fought the goblins now could transform into a full adult dragon. And so it was like this funny sort of comparing that first scene to this last scene. Now almost like godlike powers just destroying this nest and just swooping out the other side.
And if I'm not mistaken, some of these characters who ended up becoming gods ended up in a campaign with us subsequently.
And that was also some of the epicness of that for me was as a DM realizing that these stories that we tell influence the stories we're going to tell.
That's a lot. That's a lot of responsibility,
isn't it?
My kind of example of that, something I'm most proud of, it's nowhere near as epic as god level proportions, and it's something which happened just a week or two ago, where I'd managed to find the right a nice way. I say nice, I was proud of it, to connect a backstory into a moment of emotional experience. And that's something I was really proud to be able to do, is create that emotional response in a character. Nice. And have the other party members kind of swarm around and try to help out or find out what's going on or remove the problem, and just see them come together like that. That was a moment for me. It's nowhere near this god level stuff, at least yet. But it was for me just a moment I was proud of, to bring that together. And
I want to also give you a compliment on something very similar. The characters you brought as a player have always been such interesting characters to DM around.
Oh, yes.
Like we talked, like we obviously had the long stint recently where you had the memory loss and you had the sort of characters that were transitioning from almost one end of the spectrum all the way to the other. And there was a lot of trust as a DM to you as a player to try and bring that in and bring that up naturally and inject some of that craziness into the day-to-day of the story. Do you find yourself connecting a lot with certain characters when you DM? Like there's certain narrative threads that inspire you to create because it's such a cool backstory?
Absolutely. I like the players I have at the moment from Raging Rolls all have phenomenal backstories, and some are, I guess, deeper than others, but those ones where there's some which I can just dive into and just go, wow, that I can create a moment out of that. I can create a thread throughout the whole campaign out of that. And what happens from there is I can go, when I go deep into one of those kind of backstories, it just kind of dawns on me like, oh shit, there's a connection over here. Oh shit, there's story connections here. Like, because everyone creates their backstories in isolation without knowing the campaign. Right? I think as a DM, I feel it's kind of my responsibility to figure out why that matters in the world they're in. Why have a backstory if it's not going to have an impact in the world or have some consequence? I want the characters to have a personal resolution as well as a world resolution. I think I've gone completely off tangent onto a tangent of what your original question was.
I think it's a really cool point though. We do have those two elements, right? We obviously are responsible for the world and the model of the world and the reactions of the world, but we have to sometimes grow our worlds to accommodate our players.
Yeah, absolutely.
And stretch it to make sure that their individual history has space to exist in our world and is able to grow in it.
Yeah.
And it's a tough challenge when especially like you're running pre-written material, and Wild Beyond the Witchlight was definitely that for me too, where it's like you have a obviously fairly established plan and story resolution, and yet for that one player their individual resolution, their personal resolution, might be more satisfying than the entire campaign put together. How do you balance those two and try and tie them together, but also respect that they don't have to be the same resolution necessarily?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, actually. One of the backstories I was delving into, which created this moment, I was quite happy with how it came together. When the characters were talking about it later, they found a connection between their own backstories, which I'd initially missed. And I was like, oh shit, they're giving me great content here. Scribble this shit down.
Write it down.
So I think that's telling that not everything the DM necessarily does is something that's been planned well in advance. It's kind of, to your point when we kicked off, the ability to just pivot and take it and run with it. It's paramount in this kind of thing, right?
It is, and it's where your knowledge of that backstory and realizing that it's the perfect place to insert it, given like what's just occurred, that they've made decisions that led to something you weren't expecting, but lo and behold, you just pluck that in there, just pop it in, and you're sort of off to the races.
Yeah. I'm going to quickly just pivot for a second, sure, because I forgot to let our fantastic viewers and such know that we have a giveaway running tonight. You reminded me when you said, when we delved into Wild Beyond the Witchlight, we're giving away a digital copy of Wild Beyond the Witchlight tonight, right here, and we're wrapping up soon. So if you want a chance at getting that, better get in that giveaway right away. In the chat on Twitch, just enter ¡giveaway, and you'll be in the running for that awesome content. And it's a crazy campaign, right? That was
it really is.
Like, when you were reading some of that in advance, were you just like, what the hell? How am I supposed to pretend to be a mushroom, for example? That was crazy.
I think for me as a DM, the mushrooms are less of the stress than like the three witches. The three witches for me in that sort of setting were the most vital to get correct. Mm-hmm. Because they embodied the world in so many ways, because the world reflected them. Each of their sort of sections came alive based on sort of their personalities, and trying to paint them as the sort of the rulers of their space was quite difficult, and making sure that you sort of respected the witches in their domain and made sure that they weren't just like an idle threat. They were somebody that you were unsure of and could be threatened by, well into your journey in the Feywild. That was, I think, important to that setting and making sure the feeling of it was right. Mm-hmm. The other parts of it, like the mushrooms, because the setting is so jovial sometimes, were quite fun because silliness was abundant in the world, and like the unicorn, for example, by the lake is another one that comes to mind, where it was just so out of left field but fit so beautifully in the setting of wild, wacky, zany adventures.
Yeah. That was crazy. Like I felt like some of the elements there, I'm like, surely this isn't content that's been written. He's just making this shit up as he goes along. But no, sure enough, there it is.
Yeah, like that was the thing about that book, was almost like including all of the cool little things. I didn't want to miss out on stuff, because each one was just so unique and something that I've never seen in D&D before. Like, finding a random walking tavern in the middle of a swamp that would just pick you up and you could travel with it. Like, I was like, I can't not include this. And then the next section was, a crazy bullywug court full of diplomacy and backstabbing. I was like, well, of course we're including that in the adventure. But then, to your point, that was for me a guarantee. But what I never could plan for is the way that the party would approach the diplomacy, right? That ended up having big ramifications to that entire village, the way that the party handled that. And in the end, resulted in a lot of them being just mass murdered.
Complete massacre. You know what? The party just went, oh, well, the end isn't here. Carry on.
It's just that's where DMing for me is just such a joy where you end up getting your own surprises out of it because you can never expect what the players will throw at you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Robin, I know there's loads more we can talk about. I think we're going to save a lot of this content for future sessions, future episodes. In fact, if I bring up my notes just here quickly, our next episode is going to be next month. We're going to run these Dungeon Mastery sessions once a month on the off week from Ram and the Frost Maiden, which is going to be next week, so stay tuned for that. So next time on Dungeon Mastery, we'll be covering beginning before the beginning begins, which is what's the approach to going into a whole campaign, whether that's a homebrew or a pre-written campaign, before it begins, to set the scene and set the tone. Right? I've recently run through this. I think it's super important. I know when we've run Trenkash with you, we did the same kind of thing, and it's all about session 0 and prior to that. We'll stop out there, but what's coming up right now is our giveaway draw. So thank you everyone who's jumped in the last 4.5 minutes to enter our giveaway. We're excited to give this away to you because, like you've just heard, this is a crazy campaign. Actually, while this is ticking over, I jumped on Sheriff Dan's stream just the other day, and they were running Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and they were right at the pointy end of the whole thing. I was like, what is going on? This is like miles different to what we experienced. And I know that when you ran us through it, we had to try and you did kind of merge your homebrew world and Wild Beyond the Witchlight together. So the end kind of had to merge us back into your homebrew world. So it was really interesting to see how that same content that's written can be approached one way and then completely just, put in a whisk, whatever, and through the blender and come out completely different for someone else for a completely different reason.
To your point from earlier, you're accommodating your players, and sometimes accommodating them makes the ending incompatible that the sort of story requires. And I like to really be okay with destroying the intended ending for the sake of a more fun or more satisfying conclusion that feels more epic in my universe. I think I'll always make that choice.
Yeah, if it fits the universe better, roll with it. All right, let's give this content away. Who is going to be the lucky winner of some crazy ass Wild Beyond the Witchlight? Entries are closing. All right, here we go. Drum roll. Hang on. This is what's going on.
Oh, Mega Mecha Clippy gets a shout out. It just feels right.
Something has gone crazy.
I think we can also spend a whole session on the crazy monsters that we've created.
The crazy monsters that are as the result of some of our charity campaigns. That shit just gets mental.
Yeah.
Our winner is Mega Clippy herself, more or less. Herself, Kate, well done. Congratulations. You'll get that shortly. I'll reach out to you on Twitch or Discord or something, and we'll get that content to you.
Or X, I think,
or X.
is the new platform of choice.
Oh, that could be a whole nother show to discuss that issue. But listen, everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I am DM Jez.
And DM Robin.
And we'll be back again. I'll be back again next week with the rest of the Raging Rolls, as diving into Rama the Frost Maiden. Robin will join me again next month. Stay tuned to our socials, our Discord, and everywhere else you can find us for updates on when that will be. Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.